Welcome to our Thursday cross-reference podcast. Usually we take this opportunity to look at a Bible passage, holding it against the reading from our Monday Bible study of John. This week, however, with the Easter bank holiday, we had no podcast on Monday, so today we're cross-referencing one of our other podcasts from this week, from Tuesday when we prayed about the war in Ukraine. What does the Bible have to say to us about conflict and enmity? Let's start by hearing our passage for today from Luke chapter 6.
But to those who are willing to listen, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who hurt you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, offer the other cheek also. If someone demands your coat, offer your shirt also. Give to anyone who asks, and when things are taken away from you, don't try to get them back. Do to others as you would like them to do to you. If you love only those who love you, why should you get credit for that? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good only to those who do good to you, why should you get credit? Even sinners do that much. And if you lend money only to those who can repay you, why should you get credit? Even sinners will lend to other sinners for a full return. Love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting to be repaid. Then your reward from heaven will be very great, and you'll be truly acting as children of the Most High, for He is kind to those who are unthankful and wicked. You must be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate.
I will stop and breathe in your presence. Just breathe. Just breathe.
Of all the things Jesus commanded, loving our enemies is perhaps the most difficult. I may not love God like I should, but I'm determined to get a handle on it. I may not love my friends and family the way I should, but I intend to work on it. I may not love my neighbour as I should, but I've nothing against trying. But love my enemy? How many of you have had, or perhaps do now have, enemies? And how many of you would find it difficult to love them? Of course you'd have difficulty loving them. They're your enemies. If you can love them, they wouldn't be your enemies anymore, now would they? They've hurt you. They've spoken out against you. They've threatened your self-worth, your standing in the community, your finances, your relationships. They've subjected you to mental cruelty and perhaps even caused you bodily harm. I don't want to love these people. And yet Jesus says, but I tell you who hear me, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. Now I would guess that many of you are currently sitting there shaking your heads saying, not me, I don't have any enemies. Now I can well understand where you're coming from. I probably would have said the same thing myself, because it sounds too melodramatic to have enemies, a little bit too comic book or infantile. Perhaps as a child we might have fancied ourselves as having enemies, perhaps even a nemesis, but not as an adult. But Jesus wasn't speaking to children, and nor do I think that we've become any more sophisticated as people in the 21st century than those who inhabited the first century alongside Jesus. I don't think the reality of our situation has changed. Perhaps the only thing that's changed is the language. We haven't stopped having enemies. We've simply stopped using that word to describe them. We may not talk about enemies, but Harvard professor Arthur C. Brooks says that
today there is an outrage industrial complex that prospers by setting person against person, creating a culture of contempt, the habit of seeing people who disagree with us as not merely incorrect, but as worthless and defective.
That certainly sounds like enmity to me. Jesus is not talking about enemies on the other side of the world. He's talking about personal enemies who tend to be so much closer to home. These are the people we may meet every day or interact with on a more or less regular basis. Every week we work with or go to school with people who may dislike us. We may go to our gyms or clubs or sport matches or music groups or pubs or out with a large group. We may even go to our church and see people we would rather not see. Many of our enemies are found in our immediate sphere of influence. If this teaching of Jesus about loving our enemies is going to work, it must work first in the relationships closest to us. You have to learn to deal with the people closest to you before you can impact the world around you. Most of us have encountered some enemies along the way. Friends come and go, but enemies accumulate. Nothing seems more natural than to hate those who have hurt us deeply. Yet Jesus did say, "Love your enemies." If we cannot learn to love those we meet regularly when we come into conflict, then we'll never be able to apply this principle on a larger scale. Until we understand this teaching in our own immediate situations, we'll never know how this might even begin to apply to the situation facing the Ukrainian people in the face of murderous war-waging aggression. So how might I develop this love? I would suggest that it starts very simply, by refusing to avoid them when we can safely do so without being victimized again. Sometimes, instead of turning the other cheek, we turn aside so that we won't have to say hello to someone who has hurt us. And we become quite skilled at looking the other way, ducking into another room, crossing the street, or even ignoring their calls when we recognize their number to keep from greeting people we don't like. But as Jesus may have said, if we only greet our friends, what benefit is that? Don't even sinners greet each other? One part of loving your enemies is to greet them instead of avoiding them. Smile, shake hands, and say hello to your enemies. It's a good first step. In time, we'll find ourselves able to go further and to do good to them. You see, both times when Jesus spoke, he immediately added, "Do good to them," so that we wouldn't miss the point. Doing good to your enemies means seeing beyond your pain and their meanness to see their humanity. It means seeing them as people made in the image of God and understanding that there's something distorting that image within them that's causing them to do what's hurt you, just as there is something distorting God's image inside us that causes us to do wrong ourselves. Doing good means doing what will promote their inner healing despite the way they've treated you. This moves beyond merely refusing to avoid them. For now, it's you make the first move. You send the email. You pick up the phone, you make the contact, you bridge the gap, you set up the appointment, you invite them out. They may not respond well, but that doesn't matter. We're not in charge of how people respond to us. We make the first move graciously and then let the Lord take care of the results. Jesus also told us to bless those who curse us. It means to refuse to think evil thoughts and avoid speaking evil words against those who have wronged us. Forgiveness in many cases is not possible because we will not stop talking. As long as we talk over and over again about how others have hurt us, we'll never find the strength to forgive. At some point, we have to stop talking and start forgiving. And it also means to pray for them. When the German minister Martin Niemöller was arrested by the Nazis in World War II, he prayed daily from his prison cell for his captors. Other prisoners asked him why he prayed for those who were his enemies.
Do you know anyone who needs more prayer than your enemies?
He replied, "But what if you hate the person you're praying for? Tell that to the Lord too. He won't be surprised. Say something like this:
Lord, I hate this person, but you already know that. I ask you to love this person through me, because I can't do it in my own power. I ask you for a love I don't have and can't begin to produce." God will not turn you away when you come with an honest heart, admitting you need his love to flow through you. In 1957, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. preached on loving your enemies at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. As he came to the end of his sermon, he began to speak about the cross and the events of Good Friday, which we remembered on this podcast with Sam's excellent soundscape less than a week ago. Dr. King said that there's a little tree planted on a little hill, and on that tree hangs the most influential person who ever came into this world. In the cross of Christ, the love of God has broken through into human history. Now we know what love looks like in a world filled with hatred, distrust, bitterness, pain, mistreatment and abuse. If we believe in Jesus at all, we must say to our enemies, "I love you. I would rather die than hate you." Love is the only way, was Dr. King's message. And the cross, he said, was God's message that love is the only way. It's the only way to heaven, and it's the only way to live on earth.